We have a lot going on today, so I think we should get started. My name is Linda Schreiber. Please take a moment to silence your cell phones. Project Green Garden Forums are free and open to the public, and attendance provides continuing education hours. We're very excited to begin today with an announcement from one of our co-presidents, Diane Allen.
Hi. Good morning.
Speak into the microphone.
Oh, okay. Is that how it works? Okay. Oh, well, thank you for coming. And thank you to Linda Schreiber for all she's done this year and previous years. How many years you been at this? This is your second year?
Second year of coordinating.
Okay. She's coordinated the forums. And last two forums, I missed it in person, but I watched from a different location, and it's just really well done, and we really appreciate everything you do. All right, well, the good news for Project Green is that it's been around for 56 years, and in 2015, Project Green received a REAP grant it was a little more than $130,000. I can't remember exactly what it was, but, and the work was done in 2016. And really got on the road for improving the 8 acres that surround the Ashton House. Then, with all of our help from our donors, we've been able to continue working at the Ashton House, but we were allowed by the city to apply for another REAP grant this last year, 2023. And so we did that, and lo and behold, we got $200,000. So, yay! And so just the list that I could remember, which there may be more, we're going to put in a bird blind right along the entrance to the Ashton House at the corner of Rocky Shore Drive and Park Road. We're going to have a bike repair location along the biking trail, and a water faucet for people to drink, and they're going to have 3 of them. So different heights, even little dogs can get their water. Yay. We're going to have a fire pit with permanent seating around it. We'll have a walkway from Normandy Drive to the north end of the driveway, but it's going to kind of serpentine around, and so it's going to be lovely. There's going to be a pillar at that location, just like we have a pillar right now at the entrance from Park Road. We'll now have a pillar at the Normandy Drive area as well. We're going to have more benches. We're going to have lights. We're going to plant more trees. There's going to be a water system. We have one that works for the first half of the grounds, which is about 4 acres. Now we're going to have water available for the last half. So all my volunteers who are here and know about pulling hoses, and it won't be so laborsome. And if we continue having drought conditions, which let's hope we don't, but if we do, it'll be easier for us to get things watered. So that's what we have. A reminder that REAP means resource enhancement and protection. It's a wonderful thing if you see people's car licenses that have our state bird, which is, help me out, goldfinch, of course. And then it says the letters of REAP. That's what is supporting what we're doing at the Ashton House. So enjoy today's forum. We're going to have door prizes afterwards, which I have to run right now to go get. So I'll see you later. Yeah.
Thanks, Diane. It's always good to catch up with what's happening at the Project Green Gardens. Thanks today go to Beth Fisher and Public Library staff for hosting the presentations and providing presenters with technical assistance. The program is live streamed on the Iowa City Public Library's YouTube channel and can be viewed there at any time. Project Green was formed in 1968. The organization, as Diane pointed out, celebrated 55 years of service to the area last year. Our organization devotes its resources and volunteer hours to beautifying green spaces and educating the public about the environment and conservation practices. The nonprofit organization relies on financial contributions to enable us to do our work. We greatly appreciate your support, and donations can be made in 3 ways: online at the Project Green website, projectgreen.org, at the Community Foundation of Johnson County, to Project Green Endowment Fund, or via the City of Iowa City Green Fund. Last summer, Project Green was one of several environmental co-sponsors, including 100 Grannies, Backyard Abundance, Burr Oak Land Trust, Johnson County Master Gardeners, and the League of Women Voters of Johnson County, to host the environmental film Kiss the Ground. Soon we hope to host its sequel, Common Ground. So today, we're going to follow the format of our previous forums. Our speaker will present for 45 minutes to an hour, and then we'll take a short break, and you can enjoy a beverage. And because we live stream and our audiences cannot hear questions as they're asked, we ask that you write them out on the clipboard here at the front table. So let's get started. Today, I'm pleased to introduce our presenter, Geoff Mouming. I've known Geoff for nearly 20 years. Yes, he had barely graduated high school when we first met. Today, Geoff is project manager for restoration services with Impact 7G, Natural Cultural Resources Division. His company provides a variety of data-driven solutions nationwide, from telecommunications, environmental services, health and safety compliance, natural resource restoration, and clean water initiatives. He's well known in the Johnson County area, where he's worked 30-plus years overseeing prairie and pollinator installation for a commercial landscape management firm. Geoff also assisted area service clubs and municipalities in multiple Earth Day and Arbor Day tree planting projects. He's a certified arborist with the International Society of Arboriculture and the Vice President of the Board of Directors of the Iowa Valley Resource Conservation and Development, what we know as Grow Johnson County. He's also the past president of the Coralville North Corridor Rotary. Today, Geoff is addressing trees and environmental investment. He's an admitted and unapologetic tree hugger. He will tell you tree selection isn't an art form, but it does take purposeful planning to select the right tree for a specific location in your landscape. Trees are a true asset and one of the best investments property owners can make to increase the value of your home. Trees are often referred to as the lungs of the planet because they generate oxygen and contribute to life on Earth. As trees absorb carbon dioxide, they remove air pollutants to limit the effects of greenhouse gases and protect human health. Planting trees should be a priority to offset the climate crisis and benefit the environment. Trees reduce the level of sun exposure and provide a natural cooling effect from 1 to 7 degrees Fahrenheit. Tree cover is also associated with lower crime rate. Clean, healthy green spaces often inspire increased community involvement. Citizens are proud of these spaces and more likely to care for them. Think of Project Green Gardens. As a result, the upkeep of these spaces signals that residents are actively involved in their communities and discourage crime. Geoff will provide valuable tips to make a wise investment in your property. Please welcome Geoff.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to do this. I'm very flattered. Project Green means a lot to me, and the first time I heard about it was in my early commercial landscape maintenance career. I had actually worked a summer job mowing lawns while I was in school at the University of Iowa. Started there back in '87, stayed with the company, Quality Care, for about 30 years. And on my lawn mowing route, that first summer that I worked there, was someone named Kay Gillies. Anybody remember Kay Gillies? Okay, so Kay Gillies very active in Project Green in its early years. And I went there one day to her lunch. She lived over in Manville Heights. And she was up on a ladder cleaning out her gutters, and she had a very steep pitched roof, and she was like 92 at the time. And Mrs. Gillies, get down from there. But I remembered her, and this is a long time ago. This is 30 plus years ago. But I, to this day, want to be like Kay Gillies when I grow up. So Project Green means a lot to me. What you do for the community is great, so I'm very flattered, honored to be here. I also want to thank the Big Ten Conference for scheduling around my presentation today. I didn't want to be a distraction to the basketball team or anything like that, so thank you to them. But let's get started. What I want to do too, in the interest of full disclosure, Linda provided the subject matter for me, and I think it's great because it really got me thinking in a lot of ways about this. I don't know that I'm going to present a lot of answers today necessarily, but a lot of food for thought. Think of this as a food for thought kind of presentation. We'll throw out some statistics, different ways to think about the economics of trees. How are they an investment? How are they a bad investment sometimes? Things like that. How do we associate monetary value with trees, and what does that look like? And I want to start by kind of setting the stage. First, a little bit about me. I am, as Linda said, project manager for restoration services at Impact 7G. Impact 7G, all things environmental, indoors, outdoors, based in Johnston. This part of the business in this area came out of a company called Earthview Environmental with Impact 7G acquired 6 or 7 years ago, something like that. So we do a lot of the natural areas work, wetland, watershed planning, and tree planting and prairie maintenance. Kind of our signature project locally, and I can talk about it here because we're local. The Johnson County Historic Poor Farm. I think a lot of us are aware of the work going on out there in a lot of different ways. So Linda mentioned Iowa Valley Resource Conservation and Development. They had the master plan for kind of the redoing of the farm, and they're doing the food systems work out there. So that's Grow Johnson County. It's kind of an opportunity to rent land and get a CSA or an organic farm started. A lot of really cool stuff going on. What we do at Impact 7G, we're in charge of the natural areas restoration. So probably about 50, 60 acres of prairie or so. I've done a lot of tree planting out there. Back December of 22, we put in about 620 trees out there. So in different ways, kind of enhancing the wooded areas out there. Wooded areas are really interesting out there, and we'll talk a little bit more about this. But if you look at the aerial photos from just as recently as 20 to 30 years ago, there's hardly any tree cover out there at all. So what's come up out there, with the exception of a few kind of monument trees, some great old bur oaks out there, some really nice pin oaks, great basswood. For the most part, that was not a tree covered area. So it's been really interesting, and we've taken advantage of the good stuff that's out there and kind of enhanced that building on what's already there. 30 plus years commercial landscape management. So I've had a foot in more formal landscape kind of stuff. I can talk about lawn, I can talk about prairie at the same time, and where I think one is better than the other. I'm an ISA certified arborist. Again, in the interest of full disclosure, I came to this a little bit later in my career. So I've been at 8, 10 years, somewhere around there that I first got certified as an arborist. Have loved trees for a very long time, but kind of dug in and got the credentials more recently in my life. I'm actually the board president now of Iowa Valley Resource Conservation and Development, and past president of Rotary Club of Coralville North Corridor. We have something new here, I'll try my pointer, yep, it works. The TREE committee, that is the Rotary Environmental Endeavor or Enterprise. We're still arguing about that, but we have a formal committee now, and this is a Rotary International initiative for doing work related to improving the environment. It started back in 2018, and the international president that year, as one of his presidential initiatives, was to improve the environment and, in fact, to plant a tree for every Rotarian worldwide. So at that time, 1.2 million Rotarians. In Johnson County, there were 461 Rotarians. So how many trees did we plant at Lake McBride? 461. And they're doing really, really well. So a lot of us came together to work on that, make it a success. How fast do you think about 80 or so Rotarians can plant 460 trees? We did it in about 2.5 hours. So if you have a big tree planting project coming up, call on a Rotarian. We'll get it done in no time for you, and we work very inexpensively. I want to talk a little bit about the state of trees in our state. So our goals and objectives of this. State of trees in our state. We'll talk about pre-settlement tree cover, kind of what it looked like. A lot of us know that Iowa isn't like a forest. It never really was, as far as we can tell. But there was more forested land, to be sure. What was Iowa? Mostly tall grass prairie, right? And that was the case at the beginning too. We have lost a chunk of our forest, certainly, and we'll show you that here in a second. But it's not anything kind of like that prairie statistic that we all hear. Iowa was 85 to 90% prairie cover, and we have 1/10 of 1% left. The good news is I think that's growing a bit every year, so I'm cautiously optimistic about that. Trees, not quite a dire situation as that. We'll look at the current state of trees, the local urban tree canopy. There's some great work. Iowa City's forestry department is wonderful. I have the opportunity to work with them professionally and on a volunteer basis a lot, and they've done a great job kind of reforesting the city. What have we gained and lost? Derecho and emerald ash borer, right? Those are the two big animals that have really changed and had a profound negative effect on our local tree canopy. And when we talk about that local urban tree canopy, keep in mind, we're going to be talking about the urban trees, so street side, park plantings, that kind of thing. Probably not the trees in your yard. We'll talk about that a little bit separately in terms of what you can do to kind of enhance the urban tree canopy. But we're specifically going to look at the studies that have been done of Iowa City's urban tree canopy, get into a little bit of Johnson County too. We want to understand the value of trees. I made these up, principles of micro tree economics. Individual trees, landscape specimen. In that, I'm talking about the trees in your yards, essentially. And then principles of macro tree economics, forests, woodlands, timber, and the urban tree canopy. We'll look at growing our tree investment portfolio. The topic given to me was trees as an investment, so I'm using that language. Past performance does not guarantee future results, and we'll see some examples of that. You want to diversify your tree portfolio, right? And then we'll talk a little bit about succession planning and tree legacy. And then action steps. What can we do to improve the state of Iowa's tree canopy? We'll talk about planting trees, right tree, right place. That's something that we in the arboriculture community talk about all the time. We can touch on that a little bit here too. Take on a tree planting project and define its purpose. We're going to look at something in part of this when we look at the urban tree canopy, the urban tree index or the tree equity index score. That's one thing that kind of helps us to define in Rotary as we look at these tree projects. We try to do like 2 different ones a year, and we look at what's a reason for it? What part of town needs trees? For example, we're going to be doing one here coming up in April at a Clear Creek Amana Elementary School. Well, why does that? Well, it's all brand new, right? Nothing was built out there, so there's no trees. Hey, they need trees. Let's work with them. But there can be more complicated reasons than that too, and we'll look into that. Consider tree and environmental organizations for your giving. I know I'm preaching to the converted here if it's Project Green. So, and of course, hug trees. Go around and talk about and brag about and love trees. So the state of Iowa's tree canopy in 2024. Here it is to back up a little bit. This is an image from around 1830, and what this is based on was kind of the surveys that took place. Obviously, we didn't have aerial photography or LiDAR or anything like that in 1830. So this is gleaned from the original surveys that had taken place prior to Iowa becoming a state. Now notice this kind of imprint that, and we'll toggle between the two a lot, but what do we see up here in the northeast corner? What's that area? Driftless, right. So that's an area characterized by, it's kind of rocky, it's really hilly, and that very much looks kind of like it does today, with some exceptions. There's obviously farms, if you've ever been up there, to be sure. But that's an area that never really was the wide open prairie, so it's stayed more or less intact. If we look down into kind of southeast Iowa, where we are, notice there and kind of around the state, what do you notice about where the tree cover is? It's kind of along the rivers, right, and the waterways. So why was that? What do we know about Iowa pre-settlement landscape? A lot of fire sweeping across the land. Iowa's state tree, anybody? Bur oak, right. And why did those survive? Because they could withstand fire, right? They were fire adapted, they've got the thick corky bark on them. And still, as we go across Iowa, we'll notice those remnant oak savannas that are still out there. So the bur oaks are one of those rare trees that we see that really could reach out. You know, we think of trees trees naturally grew among a lot of other trees, and they're used to being kind of more kind of upright than what we see in our yards. But we pluck a red oak and stick it in our yard, and it tends to grow a little bit wider. Maples are like that too than they would in a wooded setting. But the bur oak, because fire swept through and it was able to survive the fires, it was able to grow out into this long, kind of gravity-defying kind of shape, which is so cool. But that was what we see and why the bur oak savannas developed from fire sweeping across the landscape. And there's where we are today. So yeah, toggle a couple times. But you see here, kind of following along, what would that be, Des Moines River, I believe. Still in southeast, south central Iowa, definitely up in northeast Iowa in the driftless area. There's still quite a bit of forest in Iowa, so it's probably about half what we originally saw. The estimate was that pre-settlement tree cover in Iowa, 19% of the land. Subsequent studies have suggested that that might be a little bit generous, that maybe it was more in the 15% range, but let's say 13 to 20%, somewhere in that range of Iowa's land cover was forest, and that's estimated. Got to a low in the 1950s of around 7% or so, and today we're up to about 8.5%. And there are some figures, promising figures, that show there are a lot of trees being planted out there. So we're cautiously optimistic. Again, it's nothing like 85% prairie down to 0.1% prairie. This, to my mind, seems like it's surmountable, and we can probably make some real good with the trees in this situation, doing some planting. 85% of the canopy is privately owned. So that's the forested land in Iowa, 85% privately owned. And if you throw in the urban tree canopy, those images I showed you before, obviously 1830, we didn't have a bunch of urban tree canopies, but the more recent one we did. But if you include that, we're more like 90%. If we include like the trees that you all have in your yards, about 90%, 90 to 92% of our trees are privately owned. As I go through here, if you see any of these references I make and you want these emailed to you, see me afterwards and I can send that to you. These are all really, really long studies and they're really good. And my coworker Erin will vouch for this, that I probably missed a lot of time at work just digging into going down these rabbit holes. But fascinating reports. So pre-settlement forest cover, about 6.7 million acres. Today, about 2.9 million acres. And bear with me as I come over here so I can read, but you can see here some of these statistics here. Oops. There we go. These statistics here will show kind of the change between 2016 and 2021. Some categories are growing, some are not growing or dropping a little bit, but they're fairly steady, really. It's kind of stable with incremental increases in the amount of forest cover and tree planting that we see. So I think overall the news is good, is that we're increasing the amount of trees in Iowa. Do I think we could do a little bit faster? Probably. And then zooming in on Iowa City's urban tree canopies. So this document over here breaks down and goes into some great detail about what kind of savings we're experiencing based on the tree cover that we have in Iowa City. What are the environmental and, more importantly, the economic environmental impacts, the dollar value environmental impacts of the urban tree canopy. This is street trees and park trees in Iowa City, so this doesn't include all the great stuff you all have growing in your yards. This is just the urban trees. Did it with an organization called Planet Geo, and Planet Geo does this. They map trees, and they've got all kinds of really cool methods of doing this, and they do it for cities all over the nation. Planet Geo, if you write nothing else down, take a look at that, but it's really interesting, and you can interface with it and go in there and run some different calculations, just kind of see what the benefits are of trees in different areas. If you're from a different area, have relatives in different areas, chances are that urban area is going to be covered by some Planet Geo statistics. So in 2018, there was the Urban Forest Management Plan, and that's kind of what these statistics are drawn from. And what happened since 2018? This was before the emerald ash borer really took hold. I think it was found here in 2016, or it landed here in 2016. And we all know that we've seen the damage is extensive now. I always use Market Street as an example. I never used to be able to see to the west side of the campus on Market Street, but you certainly can now. And then, of course, it was pre-derecho too. So at the time of this in 2018, about 45,000 street and park trees. Green ash made up 6.1% of them. So we'll get to that. What was it? Past performance does not guarantee future results. We'll talk about that a little bit in that context. And the statistic here, again, if you want to look at the full management plan, this is on the City of Iowa City's website under the forestry tab. It too is a really interesting document.
Geoff, does this include the University of Iowa campus?
The question is, does it include the University of Iowa campus? No. So University of Iowa campus has some separate statistics and great statistics too. This was specifically done for City of Iowa City, like streets and the parks. So campus is separate, but a lot of good information on the campus too. Good question. So benefits and value of the city managed trees. Increased property values, increased consumerism, better air quality because of cleaning pollution, heat island mitigation, right? We know that when we're in a big city and we talk about the urban heat island a lot. Rain interception, energy savings, traffic calming and noise reduction, community well-being, community aesthetics, recreation, wildlife. Here's one thing I want to point out because the person who introduced me, I think, had a great impact on this in the City of Iowa City. So we know that these areas around the parking ramps, the pedestrian mall, things like that, look back maybe 10, 15 years or so, maybe not a ton of attention was being paid for them, but there is this idea that, right, you dress up, you make an area look cared for, and the chances it's going to be vandalized or the crime is going to be committed really go down drastically. I think this is borne out by all the beautiful plantings out here that Linda has kind of led the effort to take care of and do a really good job of. I don't think it's controversial to say that downtown Iowa City looks really great today and a lot better than it probably did 10 to 15 years ago. So, thank you. All this adds up to, in economic value, about $4.2 million in annual value from the city trees. Okay, what's this? The derecho, look familiar? Everybody remember where they were when the derecho happened, if you were in the area? Yep. I was at work, my office was out on the Coralville Strip, and yeah, it was right around lunchtime, and you can see, I gotta get used to this pointer. Right around in there, and that's kind of right late lunch hour that it hit the Cedar Rapids, Iowa City area. You can also see how dark it is right there around the Cedar Rapids latitude. So yeah, pretty shocking storm, and the speed with which it went across the area and the distance that it covered was just shocking, not to mention the damage that it did too. So I hope never to see another one of those, although a storm, anybody remember the June 29th, 1998 derecho? That was kind of retroactively called or retrospectively named a derecho. That was 2 days after my wedding. So we had our wedding, and that was a little more focused down in Washington County, a little bit south of here. And we lived in Riverside at the time. So had big old farmhouse, derecho blew through, knocked out our power, destroyed all our leftover food. It was just a mess. But other than that, the marriage has been fine. So some statistics, really shocking statistics, I think, about the results of the August 10th, 2020 derecho. Number of trees, about almost 4.5 million trees were destroyed in that event. 103,104, almost 103,200 acres affected, over 35,000 tons. Carbon storage value of over $90 million. And then we look at the annual benefit loss. That's a structural loss in trees. Annual benefit loss, $20.2 million a year in economic losses by virtue of losing that much of our tree canopy. 22,870 tons per year of carbon sequestration, which is about $3 million a year. Avoided emissions, $2.7 million a year. Avoided energy use, $6.8 million a year. So almost $7 million in energy use. And if you drive along, I always think of East Post Road up in Cedar Rapids. So east side of Cedar Rapids, that was very, very heavily forested before. And just driving it, you never used to be able to see sky there. And it's shocking and devastating to see it. So yeah, things have changed a lot since that last look that we saw. And we have our work cut out for us. And then this is, and I'm sorry for the small slides, so I'll stand close and repeat them for you. Again, if you want any of this, let me know and I'll email it to you. Looking at us, Johnson County, number of trees damaged, about 235,000. Lynn County, 953,000. So just a huge loss to our tree canopies in the Iowa City, Cedar Rapids area. And then the emerald ash borer. So I think it was 2010 that it first landed in Alameda County, if I remember correctly. So way up in the northeast corner, and hopped across from Wisconsin. Thank you very much, Wisconsin. But it's spread pretty rapidly too, and to the extent that kind of the pinkish, salmonish colored counties, Plymouth, Woodbury, Monona, and Osceola out in the northwest, just finally identified it in 2023. So it's going to be here for a while. A lot of people wonder, because we've been treating them for, anybody have ash trees that you treat? Do you? Okay. Yeah, and I've been asked a number of times, because I do those treatments, how long do you think we're going to have to be treating them? And I think the latest kind of state of the scholarship on it is probably another 10 years or so. Now, the emamectin benzoate treatment is lasting for 2 years. There's been some evidence that we've seen further east of here, so like Ohio, Michigan, Chicago area, saw it before we did, and there's some evidence that we may be able to go 3 years or so without treatments now, so might be able to save a couple of treatments in that time period. But we need to see, obviously there aren't a lot of ash left, certainly not a lot of municipal ash out in the wild areas, and we work in Hickory Hill Park and some other areas where there's some natural ash, and they're all still succumbing to it, and we see the characteristic kind of suckering in the middle lower part of the canopy. So we're very much in this still. I would say if you are treating your ash and you're treating it because it's a monument tree or something like that, you do need to keep treating it for sure. Have you all seen, if you are treating them, have you seen good results from it? Yeah, it does seem to work too. And I don't have any evidence that, in my experience, the ones I've treated, I've had a couple I've treated where it just doesn't take up the product, which says to me it's probably already in there and not surviving. A couple notes on emerald ash borer. If you have a tree, if you're thinking about it, basically if 30% or more of the canopy, or if you don't, if 30% or more is affected, then it's probably not worth saving. Have an arborist look at it to be sure, because it is an expensive proposition. And ash trees, the one thing about them is they're beautiful, great wood, but once they die, they can get brittle really quickly, and they break. They become hazard trees pretty quickly. The approach to it that I think our local communities have had, and as an aside, I guess, benefit or silver lining to this is that we talk a lot more about trees nowadays, right? And diversifying the tree canopy. We've noticed that as recently as 1998. It's nothing against the city of Coralville. We're all doing it. But down by the Coral Ridge Mall, when that went up, a lot of that new streetscape that went in, what was it? A bunch of green ash went in. And we're seeing what happened to them now. Coralville's approach has been save kind of what's healthy for the time being, but let's start planting some other trees while we still have some tree canopy so that there is some overlap, right? Which I think is a wise approach. So yeah, emerald ash borer is here. It's going to be here for a while. Actually, I don't know if you saw this, but for some reason it like skipped Nebraska and went to Boulder or something like that. And we noticed, yeah, it showed up in Colorado in a few counties. And we did notice, I was out there back in September, and there are ash trees being both affected and treated, I noticed. So yeah, don't take your firewood anywhere, right? This is a calculator, again, Purdue University Emerald Ash Borer Cost Calculator. This isn't live, so I can't do anything with it, but it's another cost calculator that's out there that I think is just kind of fun to play with to kind of determine the economic value of a tree. What's it doing in terms of carbon sequestration, air cleaning, pollution mitigation, stormwater mitigation, those kinds of things too. Purdue University, one of the great land grant institutions in the country too. They have a lot of really good horticultural sites. We get a lot of information from Purdue's horticulture department. EAB costs estimated, so estimated 37.9 million ash on developed land in the US. This doesn't include the woodland ash, the naturally occurring ash that are out there. And this study estimated that we had put in, this was by about 2007, about $25 billion already, the cost for treatment, removal, and replacement. So that takes into account that some of the trees aren't being treated, some are being treated, some are being replaced. What's the cost of that event that had happened to that point? So we were up to 25 billion, what's that, 14 years ago? Something like 17 years ago now. So yeah, an expensive proposition. So the value of our trees. Any questions about any of that stuff? Okay. Principles of micro tree economics. So here we're talking about individual trees, landscape, specimens, small-scale plantings, valuing individual trees. So you can go home and look at your trees, and there's this calculator you can look at and come up with the value, economic value, environmental value, carbon sequestration value of your trees with this tool. Totally free. You don't have to subscribe to it or anything like that. iTree is part of the, I think it's the USDA or the U.S. Forest Service, and a couple of the large national tree companies, Davy Tree, I think, participate in it, Bartlett Tree Experts, to put this tool together. Just to give you an idea of, like, you think about your tree, you can look at one tree, oh, maybe that's not so shocking how much it's doing, but when you think about all the trees in your neighborhood, in your town, in the state, it really adds up to a really significant environmental benefit. We'll look at the return on investment from planting a tree, the environmental return on investment from planting a tree, and then discuss the notion of right tree, right place. So small scale planting. Am I making a difference if I just plant a tree? What does it matter? Yes, you are making a difference, and that iTree calculator can help point that out to you too. Remember, the trees in your yard are part of the urban tree canopy, and they don't necessarily show up in those studies of the urban tree canopy, but it's important. It's out there too. If all these yards, if you look at an overhead image of Iowa City and took out all the trees that are in private yards, that would be a pretty bare map. So you're a very, very huge part of it. Remember, about 92% of the tree canopy is owned privately. Our tree canopy is not a set it and forget it proposition, right? It needs to be continuously renewed. So anybody have the experience of having lost a tree and needed to replace it? This is an ongoing, living, breathing thing. And especially with the emerald ash borer and the derecho. These events are, I'm afraid, going to happen again. We'll talk a little bit about planting maples. Don't plant maples unless you really, really want to. I can't control that, but maples are probably the next that we're going to see some significant pest impacts from. The Asian longhorn beetle, they're just honestly overplanted too. I love maples. Standing underneath an autumn blaze maple, right, is stunning in the fall. It's amazing. At the same time too, take into account what we've got out there already and what could be coming down. Just don't overplant a single species. And then, yeah, the set it and forget it proposition, these are nice now, but something could come along to change that. When is the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago. When is the second best time to plant a tree? Right now. So being in this line of work, a lot of people really, really want instant impact from their trees. I get that, and that's positive. It can be a very expensive proposition to do that. It's not always the best thing in the world for the tree. You've got to be careful how you do that. But I think planting a tree right now, you can enjoy it now. You can enjoy watching it grow, and don't waste time to do it, right? If you've got an open space, you think it could use a tree, put it in and start enjoying it now. And think about what the future generations are. Here's one thing I'll say about the name of our company that I really admire. So the 7G, we have not invented 7G telecommunications. That doesn't exist yet. It's about 7 generations. So what's our impact on the next 7 generations? And I like to think about that when talking about tree planting. Okay, here's my favorite local tree. Anybody recognize this? Over on Riverside Drive. It's a burrow, Quercus macrocarpa, 405 North Riverside Drive. That used to be the St. Thomas More Church, and now it's part of the University of Iowa Foundation building. That tree is just stunning. And when you get into Manville Heights, anybody live in Manville Heights? Yeah, okay, great trees in Manville Heights, right? And you think about it, it's one of the older neighborhoods. Also part of, it's kind of connected with, I think they call it the Finkbine Oak Savanna. So that kind of meanders over behind like Carver Hawkeye Arena into that area, ultimately all the way over to Melrose. But lots and lots of old bur oaks over in that neighborhood that are in stunning shape. I ran the iTree kind of tool on that just to see what my favorite tree in Iowa City was doing in terms of benefit. So look at these numbers. They're cool. Not a huge dollar number really, but when you think about some of these environmental impacts, they're pretty substantial. And think about that with all the other trees in Iowa City, right? So carbon sequestered, 43 pounds. CO2 equivalent that it absorbs, about 160 pounds. These numbers, I think, are really important, especially because it's over by City Park. And right, remember what happened in 2008 and 1993, and so on and so on. All those 100-year or 500-year floods that we get way too often. Avoiding or intercepting runoff. Runoff avoided, 927, almost 1,000 gallons of runoff avoided by this single tree. Rainfall intercepted, so this is a canopy intercepting it. Rainfall is just coming down really hard. And think about like a stream that's been straightened too. Water that flows really freely has a lot of scouring power. So if this is breaking up the rain, especially a heavy rain, just as it's hitting the ground, especially when it's leafed out, which would make sense. Most of the rain is going to happen when it's leafed out. So that's a significant impact on the ground underneath. It keeps it from washing away. Yeah, if you want to take a picture of that, but iTree, easy to look up, and you can do this kind of calculation on the trees too. That was yesterday morning. The sun really cooperated with me. And then this is one I like to go through too. So benefits of trees. I believe I got this one from the Trees Are Good website. The social benefits. Trees provide beauty and help people feel serene, peaceful, restful, and tranquil. Anybody ever like to walk through Hickory Hill Park, right? Economic benefits. Property values of landscaped homes are 5% to 20% higher than non-landscaped homes. So there used to be a figure that we used in the landscape world too, that investing the dollar value that you put into landscape kind of stuff in your yard is a similar, if not more valuable return on investment than like remodeling your kitchen. So it's kind of on a par with that kind of thing in terms of return on investment. You lower your air conditioning costs in a tree-shaded home. Well-maintained trees can add value. Community benefits. City trees often serve architectural and engineering functions by providing privacy, emphasizing views, or obstructing objectionable views. So I think of landscape architects as the second part of the word, right? Architect. And what does a landscape architect do? Look out the window. What would it look like from here? Where does this fit in kind of the structure of your house or the aesthetics of your house, right? So landscapes, to me, especially trees, are part of kind of the architectural aesthetic of your property. Environmental benefits. The leaves filter the air that we breathe by removing dust and other particles. I live on a farm that was a soybean field when we moved there, so trees are up to maybe 15, 20 feet tall now, but I don't have a lot of dust removal going on my gravel road, so I'm looking forward to, when I'm 90 or so, that those are going to start doing their job. But we know this, that, you don't walk around, say, the old Chautauqua field or marching band field in Manville Heights and get all dusty, right? There's a lot of tree cover going on in there. It's not all dusty through there. That's the effect of the leaves and the other plantings on the trees. Deciduous shade trees cool homes in the summer and allow the winter sun to heat homes when they lose their leaves. Trees cool the environment. Trees can serve as a windbreak. That's the part on my farm that is working. And then trees intercept water, store some of it, and reduce stormwater runoff. So there's a figure that bur oaks, the mature trees, like what I showed in that picture, the one over on Riverside Drive, will transpire as much as 100 gallons a day. So there's a lot going on in there. That's shooting the water back into the cleaner water back into the atmosphere. And then some key findings this is from the USDA's Pacific Northwest Research Station, again, 2010, but I think it definitely speaks to what we're talking about today. The presence of street trees increased the sale prices of houses in Portland by an average of 88.70 and reduced time on the market by 1.7 days. A tree in front of a house increased the house's sale price by about $7,000. The tree's benefits spill over to houses within a 100-foot radius, increasing their combined value by about $13,000. Citywide, street trees add $1.1 billion to Portland's property value. So, and you'll see a picture here shortly. We think about the tree-lined streets, right? Everybody loves a tree-lined street. And this speaks to that. Those are neighborhoods we want to move to, and it takes a long time to get there. You'll see on a map I'm going to show in a little bit too, some of the neighborhoods. So we're going to look at where the tree concentration is in Iowa City, the Tree Equity Index. And I'll preface that before we get to it by saying that, there's no judgment in that. A lot of times there's no tree cover in an area because, in this example, because an airport's there. So there are lots of reasons why it might be light tree cover. But it is something that can give us an idea of where we can maybe focus our replanting efforts. So principles of macro tree economics: reduce stormwater runoff, carbon sequestration, improved air quality, energy savings, increased property value, and then we'll get to the tree equity score. So the tree plotter inventory, this is interesting too. Again, PlanaGeo that worked with Iowa City, this is from the Iowa City Forestry page, and this speaks to Iowa City's urban tree canopy. So these are the city trees again, about 44,300 trees. Top species, and this is going to be an eye-opener to see what the top species in Iowa City are. Top species is silver maple, largest tree, cottonwood, 70-inch diameter. So my favorite bur oak is not the biggest tree in Iowa City. The benefits, we had talked earlier, we saw this slide, about $4.2 million in annual savings. Again, stormwater runoff reduction, carbon sequestration, better air quality, energy savings, and property value. That is just the citywide streets in Iowa City. I encourage you to look at this. This is from the City of Iowa City website. Very interesting information. But again, remember, we have work to do because it was pre-derecho, pre-EAB. So there's a little bit more work to do on this to kind of get back probably to this state. Then the tree equity score. So 200,000 tree equity scores are available for nearly 200,000 urban neighborhoods in the United States. And I'll show the website for it. This is really interesting to look at because they've got the urban areas pretty well covered in the U.S. Just looking at Iowa, looking at our local area is really, really interesting to see too. 260 million people live in the neighborhoods covered by the tree equity score. So what are we, 310 million in the country or so? Big chunk of the country is covered by this. We need over 500 million more new trees to achieve tree equity in all areas with inadequate tree cover. So if you like tree planting, you're not going to run out of things to do. Good hobby to take up. And these trees would provide ecosystem service benefits valued at nearly $3 billion a year. Okay, here we are, the fun stuff. So this is the Iowa City area, and this is the tree equity score. The lighter colors, so more toward the yellowish, are where we probably need some work to do on our tree canopy. The greener areas are where the equity score is higher. So the higher the tree equity score, kind of the better, the more tree cover and the more positive impacts you're getting from tree cover. So it is this neighborhood right here, far southeast side of Iowa City. And what do we know about that part of it? Well, a number of things could be true. That's kind of getting out into a rural area too, so that's kind of butting right up against farmland. That may be one of the reasons. It could be that there are just larger areas. I think there's manufactured housing out there, things like that. It could also be that there's a lot of rental properties too. So if we look at an area that maybe has a high concentration of non-owner occupied houses, probably stands to reason that the tenants aren't spending a lot of time doing a lot of landscaping there. Maybe they're income properties, people trying to maximize income. Again, not a judgment, it makes sense economically, but those are areas where the tree cover is a little lighter and probably an area that could benefit from some tree planting efforts. I know that when we look at this for deciding where to put our Rotary tree planting efforts, we'll look at that, and we're not going to go to people's yards or private properties to do it, but is there a park in that area that could use more tree cover? Does the city have a project, maybe looking at enhancing the street tree cover in that area, or even the schools? We've worked with schools to enhance their tree cover as well. They're also down in that part of Iowa City, what manufacturing areas too, so that kind of is taken into account by this. The score indicators over here, these are kind of the demographics and the socioeconomic kind of indicators too that we'll look at. And those will say something about it too. Those are going to show what the potential health burden could be on it, kind of quality of life indicators there. So I think those are important to look at too. This was not going to be a surprise. Equity score of 100, the number one ranked block in Iowa City is what, oops. So that area right there, the dark green circle, can you tell by that curve what that is? It's probably Manville Heights, Mosquito Flats area over by City Park. Makes sense. Older neighborhood, was developed very early. We just talked about how it's got a lot of bur oaks over there. So it's just historically older, got a historically older tree canopy. Probably a lot of single family homes in that area that have been there for a long time. And it's a lot of park space that gets brought into this too. So it makes sense why that's that way. But I don't know, I just wanted to show this to kind of show where the difference is. You can see over here, this one in particular, and they've even got a little airplane symbol on there. Why is that tree cover, that tree index score is so low, or tree equity score is so low in that area? Well, there's an airport there. I don't think there's a lot that we can do about it, but I think tree equity score is an important tool for us to look at, to think about this. Where do we need it, and is there a good reason? Like an airport, okay, well that makes sense, we're not gonna plant there. But do we have areas that are in the lighter shades that, maybe that is where we focus our efforts. One of the other reasons, and looking up in, like in that area, up in North Liberty, maybe newer part of Tiffin, why is that a lower tree equity score? They're new neighborhoods, right? All these places were just built. So those could have tons of trees in them, but they might only be as tall as me. So this will change over time. This, like our tree canopy, is dynamic, changing over time, not a set it and forget it. But I think it shows us what we can aspire to in the older neighborhoods, and where we can focus our efforts if we're doing tree plantings. And that's the website where you can see this. Again, interesting information. The other thing too is that going into that, when I first started working at this, I immediately thought you're going to see a low tree equity score in areas that maybe we associate with poverty. And I didn't see that everywhere. It's not the case. That does happen in some old areas. It can happen, but some are just because they're heavy industrial, they're manufacturing areas. Certainly areas where we can plant trees, right? And I shouldn't say this having been in the lawn care industry for so long, but there's some really big lawns in Iowa City, right? And on commercial locations, in parks, lots of opportunities to get more tree canopy in there. So if you work for a place with a really big lawn, please feel free to encourage them to plant more trees. And then growing our tree investment portfolio. How's my time, Linda? Okay. So again, past performance does not guarantee future results, right? I know it's hard to read. Anybody want to guess what that first picture is in the upper left? That used to be the chestnut cover. So prior to the 19-teens, that was the American, before the chestnut blight. So remember, the chestnuts were the main shade tree that covered the forest out in the east. It came further than that, but that was where the kind of the bulk of it was. What we do after we lost the chestnuts, the elms did really well as shade trees on streets, didn't they? And so we planted all these streets with all these big, beautiful elms. They looked gorgeous until they didn't. And what came along, the Dutch elm disease, which we still have. And there are developments of resistant varieties of elm out there now. I think a Princeton elm, there's an American elm, lots of varieties out there. So we're hoping that the elm canopy can come back. If anybody's wondering if they should grow an elm, I think you should. It takes a while for them to catch it. We want to keep that genetic stream alive. We also, through doing that, can find that there will be resistance traits that develop. So when that happens, that kind of helps us to develop them into resistant varieties. But yeah, shocking development there. That's, I think, Winnipeg. And then this is the more recent one. This is a picture we see a lot, and some of you may have seen this too. This is more recent, so this is in the last 20 years. June of 2006, August of 2009 in Toledo. So this was kind of the heads up that we got. Remember, we first started seeing emerald ash borer in 2010 here. This was 2009 that we saw that. We were fortunate in that we had a bit of a heads up and were able to start doing some planning. So I don't know if you remember, we don't hear so much of this anymore now, but if you're within, I think it was 15 miles of where an emerald ash borer is spotted, then that's when the time to start treating is. And now it's basically, you know, it's here, it's everywhere in Iowa. But this was what the heads up was. So yeah, very sad. What does this mean we should do? Diversify your portfolio, right? So again, so these seem like a good idea, right? Anybody know what the one up in the upper left is? Yeah, the Bradford pear or Callery pear. Boy, they're sure pretty in the spring, aren't they? And they grew readily. They were hardy in a lot of places until they weren't. And we had one, my wife and I used to live over in the Longfellow neighborhood, had a Bradford pear that I think was about 12 years old. And one day we went out and it was just snapped over. So two things with the Callery pears is that they kind of escape cultivation. So in some areas, I haven't noticed a lot here, but I know in areas it's worse. And they'll escape into the wild, so they can become an invasive plant. But also that danger of it just like getting to a certain height and just snapping. They're very, very brittle. Their structural form is pretty poor. So when we think about a branch crotch, and you've probably heard this a lot, you don't want that. That's a weak branch attachment because what, it can snap. And down in here, it's that what they call included bark, so not really attached. You want more of a U shape. And with the branch bark ridge kind of pushing it up, and that's the sign of a strong attachment. Well, virtually no Callery pears have any strong branch attachment. So they're falling apart, and they're breaking, and they're becoming invasive. So avoid your Bradford pears. How about the one in the lower left? Honeysuckle. Mm-hmm. And it sure looks cool, doesn't it, if you don't know what it is? First thing in the spring, that nice green canopy in the understory. Is everything growing up a sure sign of spring? Well, to us, that's a sure sign of invasive species growing up all over the place. So that is the invasive honeysuckle. And it's all over the place here, right? And the challenge with that, the challenge with a lot of the invasives actually is that they tend to green up first, which means that they're out competing the native stuff in there. So if that's covering everything up, nothing's going to sprout under that. You know, the spring ephemerals that are under that, they're not going to have a chance. This is also going on at the same time as what? Garlic mustard on the ground level. So yeah, we've got all kinds of challenges here. How about this beauty? Burning bush, right. Do you all know that there is a native version of this, kind of closely related, the eastern wahoo, with fun name, but look up the eastern wahoo. That is something that will have some similar characteristics, is of the euonymus family, but it does not have the invasive characteristics of this. Anybody here ever planted a burning bush? I have, yep, I had them in my yard. And this wasn't known for quite a while. It took a long time, I think, for us to notice that there were all kinds of seedlings coming up under them when they became mature. And then they started doing that. And others that I don't have pictured on here, barberry, common buckthorn, the oriental bittersweet. Lots of these were brought in, right, as ornamentals, landscape ornamentals. I bet probably 30 years ago, anybody ever buy purple loosestrife? Yeah, I did. I bought purple loosestrife. This is really good in a wet location. Yeah, it sure is, isn't it? And so, yeah, this stuff, and we become aware of this over time. So again, seemed like a good idea, not so much. So here we go. We're to the top 10 tree species in Iowa City, right? We're going to talk about diversifying your portfolio. Well, this, again, the urban trees. This is the urban tree canopy. Top 10 tree species. Silver maple, northern hackberry, green ash, crabapple, mulberry, American elm, black cherry, box elder, honey locust, Norway maple. How many of those are arborists out there saying, we need to plant more of these? How many of those are from the native oak hickory forest? Not so much really any of them. And these are the leaders. So silver maple being the most planted. Silver maple, to my mind, really fast growing, really aggressive. Don't put it too close to your house. Actually, my parents' house, it did cave in part of the basement because somebody, a previous owner, I won't blame them on this one, but previous owner had planted it probably in 1955 when the house was built. The roots are really aggressive, so if you don't have a poured concrete foundation, which it didn't, it can do some damage to it. Hackberry, I happen to like hackberries. I think their bark is really, really cool. They're pretty trees. The green ash, we know not to plant that. We couldn't if we tried. Crab apples, any problems with crab apples? Cedar apple rust fungus, anybody ever notice that? Apple scab, yeah. So if you want your crab apples to stay nice, one, if you're gonna plant a crab apple, and I don't see any reason not to, there's a native variety, so the Malus ioensis is a native crab apple. Very, very pretty. There are some actually out at the Poor Farm that we've noticed out there. Beautiful in the spring. And then there are some other, like the prairie fire crab apple. There are some resistant varieties, so you don't have to be spraying them. Spraying them is, it's an expensive proposition, and you've got to time it exactly right to be able to control it. The mulberry, we don't want any mulberries. So we've got enough mulberries out there. American elm, glad to see there's some of those in the tree canopy surviving. Black cherry, there's plenty of those. The box elder is kind of an invasive version of a maple. Honey locusts are all over the place too. Norway maple is also one that's considered mildly invasive. But the reason I put this list up here is if you're thinking on planting a tree, don't plant one of those because we got enough of them already. And there are some other reasons for some of them too, but those are the ones that are all over Iowa City. So diversify your portfolio. Don't overplant a single genus. So right now, maples in general, we would say are overplanted. And the Asian longhorn beetle is on its way, moving from east to west. Could be here. I believe that's in the southern Great Lakes area now. Do your research. I'm a big fan of planting native plants, but I get that not everyone is going to be a good fit for the location. But if you can do it, if you can plant a bur oak and you've got the patience for it, it's a great gift to the next 7 generations, right? Bur oaks will be around for a long time. They typically survive in this area. They're adapted to here. Look at, is it hardy in our zone? And most importantly, what's it going to look like in 10, 20, 50 years? Think about that. I've been to trees or clients' homes and planted. This is going to look really nice right up against the foundation. Like, do you realize that's going to grow? So that'll be an issue, but take that into account. We'll have a graphic up here that talks a little bit more about that. Take into account those disease and pest problems. Do some research on it, right? And look into it. Is it having problems surviving in Missouri, in Illinois, in Michigan? So think about that. So study those and ask the person you're buying it from too. What's the adjacent tree canopy already have? So something I thought about here, I was called up by actually my physician to look at one of her trees, and she had I think it was 4 or 5 white pines, eastern white pines in her yard, and 3 of them had died rather abruptly. And And we always say that trees don't die overnight. They don't die overnight. And usually what finally kills them is probably a secondary pest to something that was wrong in the first place that weakened the tree. Well, in this case, we weren't used to seeing this particular phenomenon happen with the white pines. White pines we thought are pretty durable around here. White pines are, in fact, native to Iowa, but they were more up in that kind of driftless area. A couple other pockets of them here too. So they are transplanted in this area, not really native to Johnson County, but not far away. Thought of them as being a pretty resilient tree. What was not resilient? The Austrian pines, the Scots pines, and those have been succumbing to the pinewood nematodes. Well, sure enough, this pine tree was showing symptoms that looked a lot like what was happening to the Austrian and the Scots pines. And so took some of the branches after the dying one was cut down, sent it to the Insect and Disease Diagnostic Clinic at Iowa State, and sure enough, the pinewood nematode in white pine. So this was in Coralville, up near Holiday Road, and a lot of white pines right in that adjacent area. So we're a little concerned that that's going to be going. The last one that was surviving, we did an experimental treatment on it. And not that experimental. It was actually the same kind of insecticide we use for emerald ash borer. There is some indication that the emamectin benzoate could be effective on that, but it wasn't really sucking up the herbicide at that time. So yeah, even eastern white pine could be a concern right now. So why do I say that? If everybody in your neighborhood has white pines all over the place, maybe think about a Norway spruce if you have to have a conifer, or an eastern red cedar or something like that, or a deciduous tree. Yes, know what the neighbors have, and then take into account the possibility that if it gets something, yours is going to get it too. What's your risk tolerance? I got a little hung up on this investment language, but we are seeing, obviously, the climate is changing and the hardiness zones are changing. Now, one thing I just saw at a recent presentation of the new hardiness zone map areas that came out, so this just came out in like November or December of 2023, hadn't been updated in over 30 years. I think the last map was 1990. Before that, it was 1960. Of the areas that really changed, and you look at eastern Midwest, so Ohio's way different on it. It's really, really changed. Iowa looks kind of similar to the way it did. So we, in terms of hardiness zones, in terms of our temperature extremes, haven't changed a ton. I think our weather is, look at it outside today and how it's been for the last month. Yeah, weather's a little odd, but we still have those extremes. But we've seen some trees that were maybe marginally hardy in, say, central to northern Iowa, kind of starting to do better now. I think of things like the sweet gum. I love that tree. Ohio buckeye was more typically seen kind of in southern Iowa. That's where I'm talking about risk tolerance. So maybe if you came down to see my presentation from Decorah or something like that, well, maybe you could get away with trying an Ohio buckeye up there now, a sweet gum, those kinds of things. And then the 10-20-30 rule. This is the idea that you don't want to plant any more than 10% of one species, 20% of one genus, and 30% from the same family in any kind of defined area. And for the purpose of this, generally speaking, in a community, you wouldn't want to exceed that rule. Any questions at this point? Okay. So succession planning and the tree legacy. Best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. Next best time is today. And then Aldo Leopold is from what state? Iowa, right? So Aldo Leopold, in the normal course of events, only gods and poets are allowed to do creative acts, although commoners may get around this limitation if they understand how. One requires not to be a deity or a poet to plant a pine tree. All that's required is a shovel. So I love the Aldo Leopold quote. When I am such a nerd that I actually read from a Sand County Almanac as our grace at Thanksgiving. But also, and my wife is a nerd, she couldn't make it today, but she is a nerd like me too. We actually spent our 15th wedding anniversary at Aldo Leopold's shack in Baraboo, Wisconsin. And it was a misty, rainy, cold day in June. And the docent was a professor from Loras College up in Dubuque, great guy, just the three of us. Normally you have to pay extra to go into Aldo Leopold's shack, but he let us in that day. So we were kind of sheltered from the rain in Aldo Leopold's shack, which gives me goosebumps to think about. But we were reading as we walked around the property from the different sections of a Sound County Almanac that part of the book represented on the property. But we started reading, and we read the part about, like, why are there pine trees here? This isn't really native to this area. They're growing in a straight line. And the answer was, because he liked them. He just liked them. So even someone as vaunted as Aldo Leopold will sometimes plant trees just because he likes them. And then this one I like too. A society grows great when old men plant trees whose shade they know they shall never sit in. So action. This kind of speaks for itself, doesn't it? Right? So don't plant under utility lines. Okay? Maybe shrubs, maybe flowers, but not these. Again, I mean, no disparagement to anybody in the utility line clearing industry. They're doing the best they can. One story about this, though, that's very serious, and this was kind of whimsical, but so our company now is actually part of Right Service Corp. Right Tree Service, you've probably seen them do a lot of utility line clearing. They also have a lot of other environmental service businesses. But when we were there for our orientation just recently, this happened. They're telling a story about safety, right? Safety is job one. It's true at our business, true at Right Service Corp. And they tell this anecdote about one of their crews had gone to a home to do some utility line clearing. And you know, sometimes you love the trees that even if it's not your tree, if it's on the city parkway, it's still kind of your tree, right? It's giving you shade. You get attached to that kind of stuff. Well, this tree they went to clear and do some utility line work on. It was a bit of a hazard because it was actually contacting a tree. And the homeowner came out and was a little angry and said, no, you can't do that. We love this tree. This is a tree. My daughter loves to climb in this tree all the time. And she calls it the tickle tree, right? Yeah, it was the electrical current going through it. So, yeah, absolutely terrifying. So, I mean, that can be very serious. And I don't know what could have been done if, I don't know, if stepped in a puddle or a metal rod. I don't understand electricity well enough to know exactly how that could have translated into a really bad situation, but it certainly could have. But that tree was charged. So very, very scary. Or imagine if somebody went to do some pruning on their own on it. So, yeah, scary situation. The repercussions of it can be very serious. The other thing with these two, I mean, if these were all ash that were in that kind of situation and they started to die back, you immediately have both a physical hazard and an economic disaster going on. So don't do that. Right tree, right place. This is a fun little graphic. This is from an electrical co-op in Kansas, I think is a really good representation. But a good general rule, a clearance zone. Plant at least 10 feet away from ground-mounted transformers, because where do those go? Those send some electricity underground, right? Large tree zone, plant large trees over 35 feet when mature, at least 50 feet away from overhead power lines. We just saw a good example of that. Same with this one, the medium tree zone, plant medium trees at least 25 feet away from overhead power lines. I like the one next to the house too. You see these little fastigiate or columnar kind of evergreens very close to a tree. And remember too, people think of tree, what's a tree root zone look like? Like go way deep? Do trees have deep roots? You hear about like deep tree fertilization or deep root fertilization? No. There's no deep roots on trees. Maybe when they start, they have a taproot to get started. But any trees you see toppled over, they're going to be like that, right? It's a big flat kind of disc that they pull over. So they're anchoring themselves, kind of grabbing onto the ground. So think about that when planting up close to your foundation too. Keep area around the meter clear from obstructions and debris for visibility. It's for the sake of the electrical co-op in Kansas. And then 15 feet or high to keep 10 to 20 feet away. It's best not to plant in this area if you do plant only low-growing trees and shrubs with a height of less than 15 feet when mature. Okay, what does this not show? Call before you dig, right? Right. Yeah, sidewalk too, that's a good point. But yeah, call before you dig. So before you plant, even in your yard, call beforehand because and especially in newer neighborhoods, a lot of the utilities are, thankfully, in my opinion, running underground now. All these things to take into account. Height, will the tree bump into anything when it's fully grown? How wide will the tree grow? So the canopy. Is a tree deciduous or evergreen? So this is something to take into account. Kind of if you're planting a tree for the purpose of cooling your house, providing shade in your house, that kind of thing. Form or shape, a columnar tree will grow in less space. Round and V-shaped species provide the most shade. Keep in mind also what's going on underneath too. One of the most frequent questions I used to get asked in my previous career was like, hey, can you help me get some grass to grow under this 50-year-old maple? I'm like, no. Well, my neighbors have it. No, they don't. Go look closer. No, you don't have a lot of grass under, and if they have it now, they're not going to for very long. Keep that in mind too. Like when you're planting under a tree, you can plant something under a tree, but you want your tree to do well. The grass is a really kind of bad competitor against it. Growth rate, how long will it take for your tree to reach its full height? So taking that into account. So we've done, we actually on our farm, so we've got about 5 acres that we consider to be our yard. When we first started planting that, we have an area, we're cat lovers. I was going to put my cat memorial tree on here, but I didn't want to get teared up during a presentation. But we planted a bur oak for that, just for the idea of longevity, right? To be a memorial for a really long time and to be slow growing. And it's in an area on a hill that overlooks a very vast area. If you want something that you're going to get some enjoyment out of, look into what that growth rate is too. And you can get good growth out of some trees in 10 to 15 years. It's a pretty substantial tree in that amount of time. Soil, sun, and moisture requirements. There are trees that you can grow as an understory tree, right? So some of the hornbeams, the buckeyes like to start in shade. Pawpaws, anybody growing pawpaws? They are cool. They are native to our area. We planted 9 or 10 pawpaws in a shaded area out at the Poor Farm too. In the area we call trail mix, which is fun because there's some nut and berry trees out there, and there's a trail going through it, hence trail mix. Fruit. Any University of Iowa graduates here? Anybody ever walk across the Pentacrest and smell anything foul? So know what your plants are going to drop, and do you other one is sweet gum. There's some really nice sweet gums on the University of Iowa campus too. But if you're going to walk around your yard barefoot, be aware of what the sweet gum trees drop in terms of their spiny fruit. And then hardiness zone. This is something, again, our hardiness zone really hasn't changed significantly. But what is something to take into account when we're planting a tree is sort of the extremes in moisture that we're seeing. Because we had a period of time for about 10 years, not that long ago, it was a pretty wet pattern. And I think we're in the opposite right now. By the way, if any of you have any arborvitaes in your yard, water them. They're going to need it. Okay, tree planting projects with a purpose. So I mentioned a little bit about what our Rotary projects were. Service clubs, other organizations can make a huge contribution to enhancing our urban forest. Here's something else that I noticed too. Of all the Rotary projects that we do, and I'm sure a lot of you have planned projects before, what do you really want? You want people to show up, right? And that's why you have these things. These draw the most people of any of the projects we put on. So they're great fun. People love planting trees. I've never met anyone who doesn't like a tree or doesn't want to take place in it. Maybe on those 30-degree days when it's misty, rainy. We've had one that was poorly attended, but for the most part, a lot of people show up for them. And it's outside. It's something that we can use as a fellowship experience too, and we bring the big grill and cook out and can feel really good about it. Plus it's something that we can bring like the young students into. There are like younger people, Rotaract, Interact, young versions of Rotary clubs, and we bring the students into this too. I also, and since I have one of my coworkers here who's a fraction of my age, I like to point out too, when we're doing these tree planting projects at work too, it's been mentioned to me, it's like, this is something I really want to come back and see when I'm like 50. Yeah, me too. Or 120. But I mean, it is something, it's a gift, and it's something that you can talk about for years and years and years and watch the progress. As a lot of us Rotarians will go through, actually our planting is near the sailboat launch area, south side of Lake McBride, kind of near the Cottage Reserve entrance. We did that in 2018, and it's huge. I mean, it's a very, very noticeable treed area now, so it did really well. We got about 90% survival. Most of them were bare root, and these were Rotarians, not tree experts. Hardworking Rotarians who listened to instructions on how to plant the trees. So our tree committee has planted over 1,000 trees locally. We did that reforestation at Lake McBride. So with a purpose, all of these have had some reason behind them. The one out there was, this is a formerly wooded area. It's kind of bare. It's overgrown with weeds. Well, we worked with the DNR staff at Lake McBride to kind of clear the area and like, what do you want to do with this? Mark Vitosh, a lot of people know that name, our district forester, helped to pick it out too. And we spaced them out there. We worked together to pick the varieties that we put out there and basically did a reforestation, kind of oak hickory woodland renovation project. We did a sound barrier, so if you're going up 380, there's a couple new elementary schools in the Clear Creek Amana School District right along the interstate, which maybe you've noticed is noisy, and there were no trees, there's no vegetation there. So we thought, one, our club's footprint kind of covers Tiffin, Western Johnson County, and it's like, let's work with them. So we approached, actually the superintendent of Clear Creek Amana Schools is in our club. It's like, hey, why don't we do something? And this is something that could use a sound barrier between the school property and the interstate. So we started with some shrubs, deciduous shrubs last fall, and on April 20th, we're gonna go back out and plant a couple rows of conifers out there. So that's the purpose for that one. And then we've also worked a lot with Iowa City Parks and Rec, just replanting trees lost in the derecho to kind of work on building that urban tree canopy again. So again, we use the tree equity score to look at where do we need more trees in the area. That's driving some of our planning decisions too. And then I like the notion of memorial trees, and this is something I think that's really taken off too. I mentioned we do memorial trees for more than just our cats. Actually, we've planted trees when we've lost relatives too, and we honor them. My mother-in-law, her name was Pat, and we had Pat's Peach Patch on our farm, so we named the orchard after her. My father-in-law passed away too. We planted a bur oak for him, just because he reminded us of a bur oak, had a gravelly voice, and it's doing really well. So that's our purpose behind them, and they mean something to us moving forward too. And then support tree environmental organizations. And yes, the Project Green logo was on my opening slide, so support Project Green, but also Trees Forever. The books that I have here, Shannon Ramsey was in here before we got started. This is a great book. These are free. If you don't have a copy, feel free to take one. But Trees Forever with the Iowa Living Roadway Trust Fund, they had this guide for a long time, updated it, and this just came out in like November or December. Really, really good general overview of Iowa trees, what to do, planting information, all kinds of great stuff in here. Free for the taking. Trees Forever too, we've heard they're very active in the Relief program, which is leading the effort to replant trees in Cedar Rapids, and they're working with a number of organizations. The other thing that Trees Forever does that I really, really like is that they're working with young people to get them interested in trees. So they hire summer crews to go out and work with municipalities. I think Des Moines has a crew, Cedar Rapids has a crew, might be one other municipality that's doing it. But one is exposing young people to this as a viable career and getting more trees in the ground. One Tree Planted is a worldwide organization too, so I can't speak to their mission totally, but you can look at that. A lot of different initiatives, a lot of different reasons behind it in a lot of different areas. So that's one I'd encourage you to look up. Support me and my fellow Rotarians in our tree efforts. Just cheer us on, or if you're in a Rotary Club, I encourage you to participate in those. Then of course the Arbor Day Foundation is a great resource, and anything you give to them, they'll send you some free trees for that. And finally, hug trees. Get out there and spread the word, and don't be ashamed of it or anything like that, and don't be afraid of people. This is a non-controversial thing I found. We did a tree planting over at, which one was it? Creekside Park, went over off of Court Street in Iowa City last spring, and everybody going down the trail alongside of it. Thank you so much for doing this, thank you. You get a lot of praise for doing that, and you feel good about it. It's a good way to get out and get some exercise, and you've done something good for the planet. So that is my license plate. Be nice to me in traffic. And then some resources too. I can leave that up for a little bit too if you want to take pictures of it. But this kind of thing, I know this is just kind of a broad overview, and you can go a lot of different directions with a presentation like this. I think any one of these slides would make a presentation unto itself. But yeah, you can really go down a rabbit hole with this. What's fun too is to look into some of those older maps if you've got the map software, and it's pretty easy to find, Johnson County GIS, that kind of stuff. And just look at your neighborhood, see what Iowa City looked like, back when they were first taking aerial shots in the 30s. One thing we've done with the county poor farm that's been fun to see, and I talked about a little bit earlier, is what did the tree cover actually look like out there? And that's where we discovered, actually, a lot different in that there wasn't any, but we were able to identify a few of those monument or kind of legacy trees that we've been able to build around out there. Yeah. Everybody got pictures that wants it? And it is Oscars Day, right? So I've got a lot of people that are competing with me for attention today. So yeah, congratulations, Iowa women's basketball, and to all the Oscar nominees. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much. We'll open it up to questions now. So good questions here during the break and here too. Who can we contact to help us determine what tree would be appropriate in our condo open space? What trees would be good for drought? So I'm going to say just generally what trees would be good for drought, native. That's the best I can do for that. If it grew here, it had to tolerate drought, might have even had to tolerate fire, probably had to tolerate flood and those kinds of things too. So very generally speaking, in a wetter area, sycamore, swamp white oak, birch, probably going to do well in this area. Forgive me if I've missed any. There are some others too, but those are the ones mostly native and do well in those areas with a minimum of care. Drought areas, the rest of them, essentially. We're talking about some lost red oaks. Red oaks, as we know, you've probably all heard of oak wilt, right? And why do we not prune our oak trees in the warm weather? Because of the spread of oak wilt. Well, it's the red oaks that are most susceptible to that, such that they will die. If they get it, it's basically a month and they're gone. The white oak family can succumb to it. Some survive, some don't. It takes a lot longer. You would at least have time to plant something else. But yeah, the red oaks are tough. I still plant them in some circumstances, but where we're seeing the loss of them is if they've been storm damaged, that's like nature's pruning at the wrong time of year, right? And then they can be opened up, they can be wounded, and the disease can be spread that way. But yeah, to the question, drought tolerant are going to be those natives, the oaks, the hickories, and then what was the other one? Oh, what tree would be appropriate in our condo open space? Well, I don't know unless I see your condo open space, but one of the things to take into account, I would talk to the local landscapers. As I know them and as I've worked with them, they will have a conversation. They go to the same conferences that I go to, and I would trust their judgment, have a conversation with them, because they could spend all day doing this. And they do, right? And we do. I saw a number of them at the Iowa State Shade Tree Shore course a couple weeks ago too. So any of the companies that do landscaping here have good people in that line of work. The other people you may want to call, like look up Arborist. So ISAarbor.org, I'm pretty sure what it is. International Society of Arboriculture. Do I have it on there by any chance? Actually, Trees Are Good. You can navigate around treesaregood.org. That's the ISA. That's the credentialing organization. They're the ones that call me an arborist, so they administer the test for that. And that's sort of the main credentialing body for people in this line of work. Look in there for local arborists. I'm not able to do it because I'm swamped and I'm doing prairie burns right now and that kind of thing now. But anybody else who's an arborist locally can steer you in the right direction. Next question, what can you say about Chinese lilacs? I have one in my, what's that? Backyard, okay. Oh, there. I should put my glasses on. And I see they're frequently planted in street boulevards. Okay, so the Asian lilacs, I've grown them successfully. I think they're beautiful. They're non-native. I'm not aware of any like terrible problems with them escaping cultivation or anything like that. What I did see, we had one in our yard at our farm that didn't do well. And I think I mentioned earlier, it was an over-farmed farm, just clay right there. So we had like no topsoil when we moved in there. And this is what the architect who designed our house wanted. He's like, I love the Japanese tree lilac. So we planted it for him and it died. But and that might have been the soil type or situation in it. We planted it before we lived there, so it wasn't getting enough attention. But you've probably seen them, Mormon Trek Boulevard, I'm thinking of, they plant them along there as street trees, so they're going to be subject to kind of the salinity from the road salt and stuff like that. It's a tough situation, and I think they're showing themselves to be pretty tolerant in like parking lot areas and along street sides. Mm-hmm.
I think mine was brought in by I didn't plant that tree there.
Oh, really?
I think it got brought in by something. I don't know.
Oh, maybe it is invasive.
What's that?
No, maybe they are invasive after all.
I'm not sure, but I let it go, and now I just love it. It's just beautiful. It smells great.
Yeah, they are pretty. And I like that they bloom at a different time of year than the regular old lilacs. I think they're beautiful. I'm going to plant another one, so. Do you know when the project at the Poor Farm will be completed? Never. I've been very interested to go out there to check things out. So you can check things. Who asked this, actually?
I did.
Did you? Okay. So it's kind of open to the public now. I would follow a couple things, maybe on Facebook or just look up their website. But Iowa Valley Resource Conservation and Development, Grow Johnson County. And then if you look at the Johnson County website, they've got a Poor Farm kind of section of the website. Just keep an eye on that for events that are going on. But, you know, like the barns have been restored, and they're beautiful. So they're ready pretty much any time to start doing events out there. And those are going to resemble like farm to table kind of dinners and stuff like that. I hope eventually, and this is going to have to be a warm weather kind of thing, to do maybe weddings and other kinds of events like that out there. They've just completed, what do they call it, the Contemplation Trail or something like that, but they have paved a trail around it. Ultimately, the city is going to, or the city and county are going to work on connecting the trails out there with Hunter's Glen. I think it's called the Hunter's Glen neighborhood, just adjacent to the southeast of it. So that'll hook up there. We actually just walked it last fall to kind of determine where would it make sense, where's it going to do the least environmental damage to put a trail through here, and where are you going to get kind of the most enjoyment out of it. So there are plans for trails. It's going to be connected to a trail system through there. I'm telling them keep away from this burrow because we don't want people walking around it and compacting the root system too much. But the prairie's done really well. We're actually going to be doing a burn on part of it here in the next couple of weeks. And where it's grown in so far, part of it was planted about 5 years ago, another part of it about a year and a half ago. And then the tree plantings took place kind of where that woodland is, which would be south of the Grow Johnson County area, sort of in the ravine, the lowest part of it. We've also remeandered. Actually, I don't know if you know, but Willow Creek headwaters are there. It starts out at the Poor Farm. And we've done some work remeandering the stream out there, so it's not a straight shot. There were some head cuts kind of working their way back up towards the old historic cemetery that's out there. So that work has been done. But I mean, people walk through there quite a lot, actually. So
you can just park it by the building sometimes, and the trailhead starts kind of right in there someplace. I've been out there for a long time.
Yeah. I think the best way to probably show yourself around, I mean, it's most visible right out by the agricultural kind of activities that are going on really close there. Definitely park there, but to the west, kind of by the bigger old barn, there's a gravel road that goes down between all the little kind of incubator farms there. Right. And you can kind of follow that around and walk. I don't mind. No, and people jog from the neighborhoods out there. People walk through there. People come out and say hello to us all the time, just curious as to what's going on. And it's like nothing happened out here for so long. So what I'm really, and if anyone from the Johnson County Board of Supervisors is watching, I'm so glad that that plot of land was kept undeveloped for a long time, because it's been great. I go back with Grow Johnson County to about 2015. I actually accidentally got involved with that because our office at the time was across the street from the Coralville Food Pantry, and John, who runs that, actually saw that we have trucks and trailers and a tractor, and we just struck up the conversation. I'm like, oh yeah, you can borrow that, or we'll run some stuff out there for you. And I eventually went out there and planted the first cover crop out there so they could start Grow Johnson County. But nothing before that had really been done with it. It was, for about 30 years or so. So it's great. It's a great project.
That's great.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. In the road.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and kudos to Johnson County for pursuing this. I think it's a lot of fun. So come out anytime. Okay. Is the white pine in front of my Manville Heights home native or planted by previous homeowners? Planted by previous homeowners, I'm quite sure. That's a fun thing to notice. When you learn more about trees, you notice that driving around Iowa. Oh, look, a clump of white pines. All happen to grow in a perfectly straight line. You just notice this stuff a little bit more as you're paying attention to it. So chances are really good that it was planted by a previous homeowner. Is it pretty big?
Yes.
Yeah. And
snowstorm didn't help it.
Sorry.
No snowstorm or ice storm helps it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We have some across the street from our farm. So we're west of Wellman, and right across the gravel road from us, it was 5 pines, and then it was 4 pines, and now it's 3 pines. and they're huge, really, really huge. And I look back, because I think I mentioned our farm was a bean field when we bought it, but looking at old aerial photos, I said, oh, back in the early 60s, there was a farmstead here, and before that, so that was part of their windbreak that went back to before there were flyover shots. So, I mean, those could be as old as 100 years old, maybe 120 years old. So, yeah, but they're in a perfect line, and chances are yours was probably. I think actually, because that area, I think, and if somebody watching this wants to correct me, I'd be happy to hear it, but I'm pretty sure because of the number of big, mature bur oaks over in Manville Heights, and then over toward Lincoln School, and then back behind Carver Hawkeye Arena, think of that as kind of a pre-settlement landscape, that there was probably a lot of fire that ran through there initially, and that's why there are I think it's old oak savanna through there, and savanna would mean that fire ran through it and the bur oak survived, but a lot of other stuff probably didn't, with the exclusion of the spring ephemerals underground. So yeah, does that answer that? It's planted, but it's beautiful anyway.
Well, what about that disease you were talking about?
Watch out for it.
What do I look for?
Well, watch neighbors, white pines in particular. It's one of those things you're not going to know until it's starting to show symptoms. And I wish I could give you a better answer than that, but this one was known, like I said, I think it was 4 or 5 white pines in this one yard, and one went, then another, and then another. And I think by the time I got to the one that still looked healthy, it was probably too late because it was kind of a tree injection I did around the trunk. And usually a healthy tree is going to be transpiring. You put the injectors into the xylem. The xylem is sucking up the moisture from the ground, and it didn't pull any of the product into it. So I think those pores were already clogged. Here's another note. So I was at a presentation, and this is just, it was about the notion of tree time. So tree time is a lot different than human time. And it was Dr. John Ball from, I think it's South Dakota State University, and he was doing a presentation at Iowa State, and talking about, it was a new art center or performing arts center, maybe art museum, part of the arts campus. It was newly built, and they wanted to do a ceremony for it. It had no trees, and it was his department's task to landscape the place. It's like, well, we want some spruces. Put some spruces in here. You want this like in 6 weeks or something like that. I can't grow mature spruce trees in 6 weeks. So what they actually did, because the spruce trees in that area, they were suffering from other needle cast diseases, I think, and they were going to be cut down anyway. So they cut down a few spruces, and just like Christmas trees, right? And they just stuck them in the ground. And he showed a picture, so it was winter time, it was around Christmas, and they wanted to put lights on them, and stuck them in the ground, decorated with lights. He showed a picture from like the following July, the following summer. Beautiful green spruce tree, it looked perfectly healthy. So my point being that it takes a long time for the symptoms to show, and by that time, unfortunately, in a lot of circumstances, it may actually be too late. Another thing that I didn't have any pictures of, and this could be another presentation too, but the notion of girdling roots, stem girdling or trunk girdling roots. A really common call that I would get would be that my maple tree, it's really looking bad on one side. I'm like, well, I know what that's going to be, but I'll go out anyway. And you can ask, at the bottom of a tree where it comes out of the ground, you should see a root flare, especially, and you don't see this as much in wooded areas, but definitely a specimen tree in your yard. It'll develop a trunk taper, and it gets wider at the bottom, and the root flare coming out of the ground. If a tree is coming out and looks more like a telephone pole, and just coming straight out of the ground, especially if that's the case on one side, you're almost guaranteed that that's a stem girdling root. And that probably stems back to the time that it was planted. So in the container, might not have been cut away, might have been circling that root ball. And we talk about the need to kind of tease those roots away, prune them, cut them up, whatever you need to do. Otherwise, that's going to just start kind of boa constrictoring around the tree trunk. And I've seen a lot of circumstances where, the way the root flare is feeding the tree too, it's like this root flare on this side is feeding that side of the tree, and where the telephone pole looking part of it is, or where the stem is getting girdled, that's the side that's dying, and then it's just a matter of time before the whole thing is gone. So yeah, that if you're planting a tree, take that teasing the roots away part really seriously. The other thing that can cause that too, you'll hear about the mulch volcanoes. You know, if like a little mulch is good, a lot must be really good, right? But if you pile the mulch up the trunk of the tree, that can do a lot of things. None of them are good, but it can rot the bark on the trunk underneath it because it's holding the moisture in. That can be an entry point for insects and disease. The other thing that it can do in certain types of trees, it might kind of prompt them to put roots out. And so that's where we've seen it. So too much mulch can kind of prompt some stem girdling roots going on too. So I hope it's okay, but keep an eye on it. I mean, that might be something to, I don't know, I haven't Googled it myself. I had talked to the district forester about that. I let him know when I see these things that are unusual just so we can sort of plot that. It wasn't terribly common, but as I started to look it up, it's like, well, yeah, they are a susceptible species to it. So yeah, if you see your neighbor's eastern white pines going downhill, might be time to seek out treatment, if anyone will do it. Yeah. Do I recommend fertilizer for trees? Excellent question. So generally you don't need to. So Iowa soils generally have the nutrients that are needed for a tree, especially the macronutrients that are necessary for a tree to do well. Okay, that said, how many of us are planting into native Iowa soil, right? Got a brand new house on the east side of town or north of town. What'd they take away probably before they started to build there? The topsoil. So it may not be native soil that you're actually planting into. So in that case, I would let the tree talk to you first, maybe plant it. I don't think I'd fertilize it right away necessarily, especially if you dig and it seems like decent soil. Let it do its thing first. The thing I'd be most concerned about is actually make sure that root ball gets enough water first. Circumstances that may need it though, or that might indicate it, I think you're more likely to see a nutrient deficiency, like a specific nutrient deficiency, than you are an all-around nutrient deficiency in Iowa. Best example being, and somebody here could probably answer that, but pin oaks. Anybody knows yellowing or chlorotic pin oaks around here? So pin oaks are kind of maladapted to high pH soils, which is what we have in most areas. So a manganese application or a manganese injection will kind of prompt them out of it. Again, that said, pin oaks that are older that were maybe planted in truly native Iowa soil actually tend to do a little bit better. So the Manville Heights pin oaks are probably nice and pretty, but in newer neighborhoods, they're not doing as well. I lived when I was a freshman here in Quad, and Quad had these big glorious pin oaks in them. We thought they were really old and looked at overhead views a few years back and realized, oh, those weren't even there. Well, the pin oaks do grow a little faster, so my bad in not realizing that, but they were doing really well. So Quad was built in 1919, I think, and they probably did not scrape away all the topsoil there. Yeah, right, and it was decent soil there. So they were doing fine, but the newer areas of campus that we had worked on, I have had to treat pin oaks before. So yeah, I think it's usually a micronutrient issue. Generally speaking, you probably don't need it. It also doesn't hurt. So I want to say that it's also situational, right? So a tree that's being planted in, we were talking about like tree islands or the trees downtown, right? The sidewalk cutouts, those kinds of things. Those are areas where probably could benefit from some nutrients. They don't have a lot of leaf litter coming down and breaking down or anything like that. So yeah, in certain circumstances, actually like the big grove trees, I think of these, because somebody asked me about those one time. Yeah, they're just in big planters. They probably are not getting the kinds of nutrients that native Iowa soil would have available. So yeah, it depends. If you know, I would say let the tree tell you if it needs fertilization though. Young pagoda dogwood lost its leader. Will it make a new one? Yeah, probably. Just make sure it's a clean cut wherever that happened so that it heals around it. But the dogwoods are interesting because they're kind of between a tree and a shrub, I think. Keep an eye on them. They can, I know pagoda dogwoods really don't like drought either, so watch your arborvitae and your pagoda dogwoods if we don't get any more rain. But yeah, it should. The other thing you can do is watch the next one, the one that looks most like another leader, and train that to be the leader by kind of just de-emphasizing the other ones that are competing with it. So pick one that looks like a leader and make that the concentrated one. And finally, do I see ordinances govern tree planting for multi-unit dwellings? I'm going to guess. So, okay. Can you still hear me? There it is. I know that when site plans are being submitted for approval, there are certain requirements for numbers of trees, which may answer that. As far as ordinances and maintaining them, I'm not sure, but I know that, yeah, definitely I've seen site plans, because we're called in to do tree planting plans for those sometimes. So yeah, there is something, at least at the time of getting a permit for building, that does require that. So that is all the written questions. Are there any others that didn't get a chance? Mm-hmm.
Do you know if the State Forest Nursery is going to reopen?
The question was, is the State Forest Nursery, so the one up in Ames, is that going to reopen? As far as I know, it is, because they just had catalogs out at the Shade Tree Short course that I was at, so I haven't been by it. I'm glad you brought that up. I don't think I realized it was closed, so they should be available. Yeah, they're advertising.
10 years ago or so.
Oh, okay. No, they are open then. Yeah, and they've got a current catalog out. They better be open, because we're buying some of our trees for our next Rotary planting from there. So,
I think we should also remind people who live in Iowa City that the city has a program called Root for Trees, and they will provide $125 toward the purchase of a tree that you plant if you're living in the Iowa City area. There's information on their website. I just Googled Iowa City tree planting program and came up with Root, R-O-O-T, for trees. And it's for trees purchased last year. It was from Earl May and Iowa City Landscaping. And you have until May, I'm looking again for the date, I think it's May 15th. Vouchers issued during this cycle will remain valid through May 15th. But you have to fill out an application online.